For the next 4 years, Seattle will be run by a self described socialist. Katie Wilson, whose previous job was as general secretary of a group called the Transit Riders Union, has a long list of things she says she wants to do. And among the things she wants her administration to do is provide universal childcare, summer care for children, and government run housing. She also wants more land to be owned by government instead of businesses, and has even talked about government run grocery stores. And all of this will be funded by more taxes in a city where the cost of living is already extremely high. Now, she hopes that Seattle can tax its way to affordability. She's not the first person to make these kinds of promises, and socialists have been promising that government can deliver prosperity and security for centuries. So, when confronted by the repeated failure of these policies, they believe that it will be different when they do it. But it won't, and here are some reasons why. First, socialists underestimate the complexity of the economy and of society. There's a story about a Soviet bureaucrat visiting the United States and asking who in government was responsible for making sure everybody in New York City had food each day. And of course, the answer is nobody. There isn't a coordinated system. Instead, every city and community, food is provided by a spontaneous network of growers, processors, teamsters, grocers, chefs, and others, all doing their individual job every day, taking risks and solving problems. No single person or group of people can understand that system or successfully navigate the trade offs that must occur every day, deciding which produce to buy, judging the quality, the price, the availability, and the demand that changes every day. Socialists like Katie Wilson have no experience in navigating that system, but they believe that they can make the entire process from beginning to end work better than the many people who have created the remarkable abundance that we have today. They're just wrong. Politicians and bureaucracies simply don't have the information necessary to make the dynamic decisions that are required every day to make government programs effective. Socialists say the goal of government control is to help those who can't afford housing or food or healthcare or any of a number of list of their goals. To achieve that, politicians set these complex rules and govern eligibility and enforcement while also having to manage the demands of the supply chain and economic pressures. The only way to do that is to become increasingly coercive, forcing people to conform to the politicians' plans rather than the ones everybody chooses for themselves and their families. And there are many examples of the failure of government and politicians to align their political agenda with reality in the real world. The massive cost overruns and delays for Washington's electric ferries, all to reduce a tiny amount of CO2, is just a prime recent example of that disconnect. Finally, politicians and bureaucrats in charge of guiding a socialist society don't get direct feedback on the consequences of their actions. So they stick with bad policies rather than admit that they are wrong. When socialists are forced to face the consequences of those actions, they actually change. So John Mackey, who is the founder of Whole Foods, was a socialist in college. And when he started his first grocery store, he used an approach he felt was consistent with his socialist principles, offering his workers high wages and lots of vacation. And to do so, he had to raise his prices. But the result was predictable. His business suffered, and he didn't have the money to pay the high salaries and stay in business. And despite all of that, his own workers still complained that he wasn't paying them enough, and they even criticized those high prices. Mackey said that he realized that he either needed to change his mindset or go out of business. And so he turned Whole Foods into the nation's largest supplier of organic foods, the very thing many of the people who support Katie Wilson say that they want. Now, it didn't come from government, though. It came from somebody who now calls himself a libertarian. Unlike Mackey, however, politicians like Wilson can't change when reality intrudes because they'll lose their political support. So they stick with bad policies and bad ideas, destroying the innovation and prosperity that innovators like Mackey create. So while it's frustrating to see the mistakes of the past repeated, it really shouldn't be surprising. In a 2006 interview, Milton Friedman said, "We're now only 20 or 30 years from when we had price controls on gasoline. And so a large fraction of the population had personal experience with it." He went on to predict that 20 or 30 years from now, in 2006, after there's nobody living who had experience with price controls, I wouldn't be surprised to see it come back again. Well, it is now 20 years since he said that. And Katie Wilson and others in her generation once again believe that price controls can work if they apply them correctly. And so a new generation will now learn how destructive political control of the economy is. The cost will be borne by people who have no choice but to stay in Seattle and pay the price for socialist delusions implemented by people who aren't harmed by that failure. Our job at the Washington Policy Center will be to make sure people relearn the lessons about the failure of socialism. And Katie Wilson's Seattle will provide an opportunity to demonstrate those failures firsthand so they don't spread to other cities or to the rest of the state.
If you found this informative, share it with a friend and consider checking out one of our suggested videos over here. Make sure you're subscribed so that you can stay up to date with the latest policy news from Washington.